That, my friends, is a phylogeny wheel. Phylogeny? What? Cut. This video project almost ended in failure just the same way that a lot of phenology wheel projects do, because I got really excited about the idea and I got obsessed with how beautiful a phenology wheel can look. And then procrastination and perfectionism set in, and I almost abandoned the entire video project, just like many people abandon a phenology wheel before they even get halfway through. But just before I finally gave up, I realized that the important thing about this video wasn't to make a perfect video about phenology wheels. The most important thing was to force myself to learn something new and to share ideas about it with you and help your learning and advance your nature journaling, because that is the main intention behind the Nature Journal show. But before I share with you how to make a phenology wheel, and before I share some tricks to make it much easier, and before I even show you how to draw the basic layout, let's talk about why make a phenology wheel. Like, why does it matter, why you should try it, and what are the benefits? Reason number one, because it's hard to spell and will sound fancy to impress your friends. Reason number two, it gives you a fun way to pay attention to one place over time. Reason number three, because drawing circles is super hard and they're the least efficient shape to fit on your rectangular pages. Reason number four, because it helps you notice how nature changes with the passing of time. Reason number five, because it is really hard to draw inside tiny pie slices. So what is phenology anyways? Phenology is the study of the timing of events in nature related to the seasons or the weather. Commonly, the focus is on wildflowers, blooming, fruiting, etc. Don't get it confused with phylogeny, which is the evolutionary history or development of an organism or group. I have to admit that for almost 3 months, I was saying phylogeny wheel instead of phenology wheel. So why does a phylogeny look like a tree and a phenology looks like a bunch of slices of pizza? That is a really important question to ask because circles are really annoying to draw, and before we start drawing a bunch of plants and flowers inside of circles, we should know why we're using a circle. If you're showing something in nature that changes over time, a straight line or an arrow or a series of boxes works fine. You could even just do a series of drawings of its progression. However, there are some things in nature that change over time in more of a cycle. And the reason why a phenology wheel does this is because of that big circle in the sun, the sky, and the fact that our Earth goes in circles around that sun and creates regular cycles. So that is the reason why it can make sense to do a phenology in a wheel. That's because you can have a cycle of years that go from beginning to end and then start over again with the seasons: winter, spring, fall, and summer. Summer and fall. However, it doesn't make sense to use a circle if you're not going to show the complete cycle of the year. January, February, March, April in a circle doesn't actually make sense. I made the mistake of spending a ton of time creating a phenology wheel inside of a circle, even though I didn't have a full year. It wasn't until I was halfway into this, I had already invested a lot of time and energy into drawing it, before I realized that a circle didn't actually make sense for what I was doing. And maybe it would have been better to show my phenology in something like this, which fits on the page better and actually makes more sense for an incomplete year. That's why I'm making this video for you and giving you lots of tips so that you can think through your project and plan before you draw. Here are some tips for doing that. Number one, what is the actual goal of the graphic? What are you trying to do? Are you just trying to make something pretty? Are you trying to show and remember how the flowers change in a park near you? Depending on the goal, you might want to use different strategies. Also, choosing a location is really important. I tried doing a couple phenology wheels where I had multiple locations, and it got a little bit confusing. So choosing one given location is very helpful. Choosing a time frame is also very important. The time frame is a critical part of the phenology wheel. Are you going to do it for a full year? Are you going to do it for less than a year? Are you going to do it for multiple years? Those are going to be really important decisions. I also think it's really helpful to collect photos or plan how you will collect photos in advance. Are you going to take a bunch of photos and then just have them on your phone and look at them while you're drawing? Are you going to use something like iNaturalist? Are you going to use folders on your computer where you put all of these? I found it got really complicated very quickly with all the photos that I had taken, and this was just in a few months. So those are a couple suggestions. Another suggestion is try doing it in real time. This is helpful if you have like a dedicated journal or a dedicated page, because you're going to have to keep coming back to that same page over and over again over a whole year, which can be hard for some people like myself that go through a lot of different journals, and I don't always carry the same journal with me. Now that we have a plan, let's get into making the actual diagram. I like to use some simple shapes to trace my outlines, but you can also use a compass. If you have some plates or bowls or even large mugs in your house, those will probably work fine. I'm doing a bunch of different ones for fun here. Now I'm going over them with ink, and I'm not going to get too technical about measuring and dividing the slices. I'm just going to pretend like I'm slicing a pizza for my family. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to organize all of my observations into this table. Because I have observations and photos of a bunch of different flowering plants in my photos library, it's a little bit confusing and disorganized. So first, I'm just going to put them into the months, or in my case, the weeks. This makes it a lot easier because otherwise you're just going to be scrolling through your photos library and looking at when you have photo observation of different plants. The good thing about your photos library is it does have the date attached to the photo, because for a phenology wheel, you need to have the date. So you could potentially just use your photos library and keep all of that information organized all together there. For example, I can see exactly when and where in the winter I saw these different mushrooms and galls growing on oak leaves and other types of fungus and things like that. Another option is to use your iNaturalist as your source for your observations for your phenology wheel. iNaturalist will contain all of your observations that you've made and uploaded, like these manzanita flowers, and even have the location, the date, and the identification right there. In this case, you have to ask yourself, what do you want to use iNaturalist for, and what do you want to use your nature journal for? Because having redundancy might not make sense, and each of these tools has its strong points and weak points. What I ended up doing was using my iNaturalist observations as the starting point for my phenology wheel. Then I just scrolled through my observations, wrote down the interesting ones, and organized them by week. So the slices of my pie are for 1 week. So this is January 15th through 21st. I'm going through and writing down the interesting things that I saw in each week. That way, when it's time to draw, I can just focus on the drawing part and not looking for what things I saw during each week. I'm worrying a little bit. All was going well, but now I'm worrying a little bit about how to incorporate the fact that I changed places for a little bit during the time period that this phylogeny wheel covers, because I was in Sonoma County, then I was in San Diego. So how can I show on this graphic that mainly just shows time that I changed in space? Maybe I'm just overthinking this, but this is the kind of thing that can happen when you're trying to do a phylogeny wheel, or if you're trying to do a perpetual journal or something like that in your nature journal, is you can start to overthink these things. At least I know I do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to just keep on going forward and not think about it too much, and just get that hand movement and mark making on the page going again, and then I'll probably be able to get over this overthinking stage. The hardest part about this stage was I had to constantly be going through my images and finding images to draw from. So, for example, there was salmon spawning that I saw in the first week of January, and I had to look for the photos of them spawning and my other observations, such as this leaf gull. I also wanted to show a little bit about the locations. And so I was constantly going back and forth between the computer images that I had and my drawings, which took a lot of time and was a little bit slow. It's also challenging to fit the images into these pie slice shapes. It's a really challenging shape to draw in. This week I saw a lot of stuff in the tide pools, so I was trying to draw all of these different tide pool organisms into this slice of pie. I think it took me about 2 hours to draw in all of those three slices of pie, each one representing a week. Then I'm going back to add color. So now I have to go again and scroll through the images and find my references to try to get the colors accurate. So there's the salmon page, and then there's all of these other observations, the trees, the fruit trees, and the way that they look that time of year. So once again, having your photos organized in some way is going to save you a lot of time and make this part a lot easier. You could probably also use some type of photo editing software or Photoshop or some other digital art program to cut and paste your images and practice doing the layout on the computer, and that might save you time and give you a lot of layout options. As you can see, this is a really time-consuming process, and compared to the immediacy of nature journaling in real life in nature with direct observation, this is a project that many people are going to fail or be unhappy with the results from. But I'm going to give you some tips that will hopefully help you avoid those unfortunate outcomes. Trick number one, use one of these portable printers and print little stickers and stick those into your journal. I'm not making it into a wheel, but it's still recording phonology, and it's really easy to go through your phone and print them out. The printers are a little bit annoying sometimes, so there might be other ways to do this that could be even easier, such as printing them out at a local pharmacy. Because it's so small and portable, you can take it with you on trips. Check this link right here to get your own. Here you can see a whole page that I did using that sticker printer. If I had to do this again, I would just get them printed out at a shop and then cut them out and stick them in afterwards. But it's a pretty handy tool. I put in a map, I put in some notes about the Phenology project, and then I put in all the stickers and the names of the plants plus the date. Another trick that could help you complete a phenology wheel without giving up in a cloud of self-doubt would be to do a very small one. You could do a really small wheel with your observations and then do nature comics next to it, or use words to describe more information, but keeping it small. A big one is a lot of area to fill, and it can be a real pain in the butt. The other trick that I'm going to try next, and I think could work really well, is to make a phenology wheel that is basically a year-end review. So after you finish a nature journal, or after you finish a whole year of nature journaling, make a 12-section phenology wheel and just draw into each section the coolest things that you nature journaled that whole month. This would be a really cool way at the end of the year to go through your nature journaling in a way sort of like Kate Rudder does. I interviewed her about her review process and put it all into a wheel where you'd easily be able to see the coolest things that you nature journaled each month. That would be a great and easy way to get into a phenology wheel. The very last trick that you could try to making this easier, and this is probably the easiest one, would be just to try making a table of your observations during the course of a year. You could also just make an album on your computer in your Photos app where you you put all of the flowers that you saw all in one place. You could also use iNaturalist for this, or you could do it on paper with the dates on the side in a sort of table. If you find that you really like creating such a table of observations, that's a good sign that you're going to be interested in a phenology project, and you'll be motivated enough to complete the full diagram. If you're interested in phenology wheels, but you want to try some ideas thinking outside of the wheel, I suggest trying to do tables or strips, sort of like a comic strip, but going in sequential order like that. Another cool way to think outside the pie would be to try a Venn diagram. So in this case, I did two different locations, and the central area where they're overlapping are the plants and animals that I saw in both locations. This is an interesting way to combine multiple locations because when I tried combining multiple locations in my other phenology wheel, it was a little bit confusing and didn't make sense. This Venn diagram would be a fun way to think outside of the pie. All right, there are a final few psychology tips for completing your phenology wheel, because the phenology wheel is something that is really challenging in my opinion, and it's going to be hard for a lot of nature journalers. Number one tip is don't look at examples online. It can be really challenging when you're comparing yourself to examples that you see online. So if you're struggling and you really want to try to complete a phenology wheel, I recommend limiting your how much time you spend looking at examples online. Number two is to get clear about your intentions. What is your goal with trying a phenology wheel? What do you hope to accomplish from it? Getting clear about your intentions is going to help you persevere when you hit hard parts with the phenology wheel. Choose a focus. I tried to do a very broad spectrum of things that I was noticing in nature. Then I sort of zeroed in a little bit more on flowers, but having a very specific focus for what observations you include in your phenology wheel is going to help a lot. So for example, you could just do moths. You could do your vegetable garden. This would be a phenology wheel, could be a really cool way to nature journal your gardening practice. And another one that could be really interesting would be to look at relationships, because part of the whole point of a phenology wheel is you're showing the relationship between time, place, and the plants or the animals. So if you're not really talking about the weather very much, maybe add a little bit more about the weather, and there's probably ways that you could do that creatively, like for example drawing the weather just a little bit outside of the circle or something like that. So you could show a relationship between reptiles and weather, or moths and the cycles of the moon, or maybe vegetables and day length. Those are my last few tips about phenology wheels that I've been able to squeeze out of my brain. It's taken me 6 months basically to make this video. I'm going to try to break it down into some smaller videos later on, but I just wanted to share a lot of tips because in this process I've realized how challenging of a project this really is. So I wanted to give you as much useful information as possible so that you can get better at nature journaling and try things such as phenology wheels. If you want more content, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/MarleyPeifer. Bye. See you next week.